Unfortunately, we had people who are not on the mailing list for this lecture. This is why we are not sending this via mailing list, because people won't see it anyways. Okay, and we are actually a couple of minutes past the hour, so I suggest we slowly start. Apparently, people got scared off after previous lecture and decided not to come. Okay, I'm sorry. And yeah, today we are going to have quite a funny lecture. It's going to be a little bit of a wild ride because, first of all, a lot of it was supposed to be live coding parts from your side. So basically, today's tutorials have some exercises that I originally envisioned that you will be doing by yourself while you'll be chilling in the background. But as it turned out that some of people around here do not really code that much in Python or do not code it at all, so it wouldn't be very nice for them to just sit and do nothing. So probably most of these exercises, most of these tutorials, I will be doing like live coding, just showing you what is happening if we play with the parameters a little bit. This is the first adjustment. The second adjustment is that once again, during the previous lecture, we realized that we did not cover decision tree-based algorithms or random forest-based algorithms nowhere in our course, which is somewhat funny because random forest algorithms are one of the most popular algorithms ever in machine learning. I mean, I cannot give you a precise number, but surely if you open any paper on machine learning application, any kind of sense, chances are you will have random forest-based algorithm as at least a baseline, or sometimes as a like best thing that could have happened since the invention of the sliced bread. So there will be a little bit of a detour today to cover this. Not too long, but since in any case we were talking about we were supposed to talk about one of these algorithms in today's lecture, we will take a detour and we will look in a little bit more detail how these things work. But the main topic is unsupervised machine learning today, and this is what we are going to start with. And then we will just play by ear and combine the lecturing part, the live code demo part, and you doing the exercises. Depending on how much time do we have and how much I'm going away from the main course of the lecture. So I hope that you all already copied this thing from the repository, that you already opened it, those who planned to open it. And we are going to start. So, unsupervised machine learning. During the previous lectures, you heard that we have supervised machine learning when we have some kind of data set and we have labels. And then when we feed the data into the algorithm, these labels are guiding the algorithm and telling it, okay, pay attention to this part of the parameter space, to this combination. This particular combination of the length of the whiskers and the length of the tail gives you whether it is a cat or a dog. But there is another branch of machine learning, which is unsupervised methods. So the thing is, it's not always that we have these labels. It's not always that we actually know what these data are about. Imagine that you are doing some kind of new experiment on a new experimental setup, a new telescope, new laboratory, something like that. You do not have yet those measurements that are saying that this combination of numbers gives you an elliptical galaxies or gives you a species of an Asian elephant. So what you have to do is you have to somehow, I mean, okay, you can do it old school way. You can hire a contract of PhD students or undergrad students. You make them to look at this data, you make them manually label, and then you feed it to the machine learning algorithm. But what if you have a huge data set for which you don't have the money to hire the students? Or what if you have highly imbalanced data set where you have maybe a few millions of data points that are about a class of no interest, some kind of fluke or some kind of very common phenomena, and then only 10 of those objects are of interest. You cannot just sift through a few millions of objects. This is unrealistic. So there is this pipe dream that was born probably as early as mid-20th century, is that okay? What if we can just look at the distribution of the data? And what if we can learn something scientifically useful from the distribution itself? Think about some kind of histogram, some kind of distribution. If we have some additional blip very far away from the main Gaussian, if your main part of the distribution is normal distribution and then some kind of bump, then right away you know that something is happening there, something that is not generating this main distribution, some additional mechanism. You do not know the nature of the thing, but you know that something is there. If you have multidimensional space, you cannot just look at it the way you look on two-dimensional diagram. So you need some kind of smarter methods to investigate the topology of this distribution in multidimensional space and look for those blips or for those isolated clouds of data points that are away from the main body of the data set. Or for some kink. So for some reason, you have a Gaussian distribution in 100 dimension, and in one dimension, it is a bimodal distribution. Why? First, it is why. And second, it is how do we even detect this if we have 100 of features? This is where a concept of manifolds comes into play. So we are generally assuming that in most cases, when we have hundreds and thousands of features, it is not necessary to use all those features to describe the science we are doing. Let's think about this room. The dimensionality of this room is 3. I mean, we have X, Y, Z. But if we want to somehow classify as the location in this room, we do not need all 3 coordinates. I mean, yeah, this is a bad example because this room actually has a rise, but okay, that doesn't matter actually. We need only 2 coordinates. We need X and Y, or even the number of the row and your position on this row. So basically, whether you're in the center or whether you're away. So the dimensionality of the manifold of our distribution in this room isn't 3, it is 2. If we take a cord and if we put a bead on it, like some kind of ball with a hole in the center, in order, like, it has only 1 degree of freedom, and you will need only 1 number to characterize the position of this ball relative to this manifold. So the dimensionality of this manifold is actually 1. So we assume if we have 100 of features, maybe we need only a couple of them, like not the original features, maybe some combination, but only a few. And the classical example of classical illustration of this stuff is Swiss row, which is like a favorite illustration data set for this kind of problems. Like, okay, we have originally 3D distribution of the data points, but intrinsic dimensionality of the manifold describing those data is 2, because in principle, we can unroll this thing, and then we can very surely identify the coordinates of the data points on this thing using only 2 numbers. So when we are talking about manifolds and about manifold learning, it is all about finding the intrinsic dimensionality and finding the laws that describe this hyperplane, that it would be enough to characterize the position of the data point. Now, this is naturally related to the dimensionality reduction we were talking during the previous lecture, and to the fact that when we have a lot of features, a lot of machine learning algorithms are failing because of the curse of dimensionality, because the data points are distributed all over the place, and it is kind of hard to associate them, and it's kind of hard to figure out whether they are located really closely or maybe a little bit far away. So if you can reduce, like, one of the methods of reducing the dimensionality of the data space is to look for manifolds and use this information for dimensionality reduction. So as an example of how do we unlearn this kind of data sets. So for this example, like, it is obvious that we can unroll it into a plane, but this is obvious because we have this coloring and because we are trained to recognize patterns in 3-dimensional space. Yes, we can unroll it. But if we look closer at this dataset, we see that there are some kind of gaps, there is some kind of noise. And if we do not know in advance what kind of shape is hidden in this data space, how do we even know that this kind of representation is actually the best one? Maybe what we are interested in is these small associations. So maybe these data points that are separated by some empty space, maybe it is actually meaningful that they are located in the same part, in the same area of the parameter space. Now, think about, for example, evolution of stars and how they are moving on Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. I actually have no idea how many people here are astronomers. Okay, most are astronomers. Okay, you will be okay with Hertzsprung-Russell diagram. So it is two-dimensional diagram, but it actually describes, I mean, the data points are not moving like in the same, all in the same direction from bottom left corner to bottom right. Their evolutionary trajectory are quite complex, and sometimes they are doing something like that, some weird loops. Oh my God, what is going on here? They are brighter, they are less bright, they are redder, they are bluer. So they're physically located in this two-dimensional parameter space in the same area, but there is a hidden kind of logic in there. So like this kind of hidden manifolds inside. But the thing is, it's not always that important to us, because, for example, if we are talking about classifying stars in terms of determining whether they are going to be observable by our telescope or not, we do not really care about all those evolutionary sequences. What we care about is their brightness, is their distances, and their color. So even if it is a young star that only starts its evolution, or even if it's late evolutionary stage, if they are located together, we are going to see them. So, depending on the problem, you might want to investigate these underlying manifolds, or you might not care about them at all and working on this original twisted data set in the parameter space. And actually, a lot of supervised machine learning methods, they do not try to figure out the topology. They are just blindly learning that, okay, if we kind of faction this twisted part with, let's say that this is an x axis. If we take all the objects with x between 5 and 10, then we can observe them. Nothing at fault. We are interested only in mapping these areas of the parameter space and associating them with labels. So depending on the task, you might want to go in this twisted dataset, or you might want to learn the underlying manifold. Another example, if we put a hole in this kind of data set, let's not even start if we're talking about real data set that has noise, that like if you had some data points that are outside of this blue part and closer to the yellow part, and some data points here, it's all becoming messy. But basically, putting some kind of feature in this distribution is going to change the view of your dimensionality reduction algorithm significantly. So the linear unrolling still gives us the similar picture. I mean, it changed, but kind of the relation between the points is the same. But for other methods like TSNE, about which we are going to talk later, the view is very different. And pay attention to what TSNE is doing here. Like intuitively, it might be a little bit weird. Like, why this thing going inside? What is going on here? But think about the relations between the data points. It transformed this two-dimensional picture in such a way that these yellow data points were close to each other, but also fairly close to these greenish ones. And this is actually where they're located in real original distribution. So some algorithms are aiming to unroll things and just put the continuous structure separately. Some are aiming to preserve the relations between the data points. Actually, a lot of dimensionality reduction algorithms are trying to do this. But since we are going from multi-dimensional space to more dimension, we are trying to compress a lot of these relations into smaller area, into smaller space. And this is, I mean, in the most like basic case, it's just impossible. So these kind of algorithms are very tricky, and we are going to talk about how particularly they are tricky in a few minutes. Now, when we're talking about unsupervised machine learning algorithms, there are several types of them. Usually clustering, dimensionality reduction, and anomaly detection. Rough separation because actually there is more, but let's stick to the three classical case. Clustering. Intuitively pretty obvious. We have some data points scattered across the parameter space, and we want to group similar data points together. By similar, usually we are talking about distance metrics because it is the only way we know how to describe the data sets. The distance measures can be different. So it can be Euclidean distance, common one, or it can be something like Manhattan distance, about which we were talking during previous lecture. But in principle, it is just how close the data points are together. Dimensionality reduction is this unrolling thing that we were talking about previously. It is about having data points distributed in multidimensional space and trying to describe them with lesser number of features. Different ways of doing this. Like the simplest one is just projection. So projection, like stubborn, is just we're projecting those things on the axis. So for example, our distribution in this room, we can project it to the axis, let's say this axis is X, and we can see that there is a Gaussian distribution here, and there is an outlier there. So heavy tail, okay, very traditional. We are losing some information, but it is somewhat descriptive. But we can do it in this nonlinear way that we showed that we had on the previous slide. We can try to say that, okay, we are trying to preserve all the distances that, like they are in the multidimensional space. And in this case, we are going to have the cluster here in the center, and then several outliers put it away somewhere. So it is rather hard to do with 2 dimensions and 1 dimension, but if we tried to do this with 2 dimensions projecting on 1 axis, we wouldn't project on this axis. We would, for example, do a PCA. We would find the projections that maximizes the variance. And from my point of view, it is obvious that this is like this. And then we have a cluster here. And then we actually have the Gaussian that is pretty much has the tails that are symmetrical. We have a couple of outliers there. We have a couple of outliers there. Fantastic. So if we are doing the reprojection, the Gaussian becomes symmetrical, and it is much more obvious that we have a center of the Gaussian and the outskirts. But once again, this was linear, actually. I lied to you. Non-linear way is hard to illustrate with this number of data points, but we will look into it a little bit later. Okay. Finally, outlier or anomaly detection. What if we are interested not in general distribution, but in finding something unique? So once again, when we're talking about machine learning, data analysis, not machine learning, data analysis, there is more or less one way to describe outliers. And this is if something is out of distribution or if something is in distribution. And when we are talking about out and in distribution, so if it is Gaussian, then obviously that out of distribution is the tails. But what if we have some more complicated distributions? So, for example, if we have a bimodal distribution and we have 2 Gaussians and we have a single data point in the middle, I mean, it is actually also an outlier. It is somewhere in the part of the parameter space where there is no other data points. But depending on which algorithms you are using, it can be picked up or it can be missed. When we are talking about multi-dimensional space, there is a different question. Okay, do we call the anomalies the data points that are remote in along the O-axis in all features? Or we are talking, we are also interested in data points that are in the middle of distribution along all features, but are outlined in only 1 dimension. So for example, a star that is in the middle of distribution in terms of mass, in terms of metallicity, in terms of, I don't know, color, but has really weird periodicity, like something that, why is it like this, maybe milliseconds, like changing the brightness all the time. Scientifically, this is a super curious case. The question is that in real life, you always have to figure out whether this a single outline feature, whether it is an actual measurement or whether you had a microwave that was being turned on and off nearby and it ruined your observations. So, like a philosophical note, there are these kind of questions. But I would say that in many cases, so unsupervised machine learning is much less commonly used in practical science than supervised because it is hard to interpret because a lot of things that can be ruined. But somewhat it is much more scientifically curious because this is the data in its rawest. And yes, in real life, we have a lot of noise that we have to filter out. But ultimately, if we can pick up something that is not a noise there and that is not picked up with supervised method, it is a possibility to make an actual discovery. There is some kind of signal that we haven't detected with other methods yet. So there is, once again, if you read some papers on machine learning, many papers, you will have some paragraph in the discussion like, it would be interesting to investigate this with unsupervised machine learning method because we detect some weird objects that we do not fully know what it is. And then no one is doing it because it's complicated, it's annoying. But yeah, everyone wants to do it in some distant future. Okay, coming back to doing unsupervised machine learning practice, what are the guiding principles? What are the methods that we can use? Once again, when we are talking about data analysis, the only thing that we can reliably use is distances. But okay, we can twist it a little bit in a different way. One obvious approach is to use distances as they are, like uniform, all kind of isotopic. Okay, same in all directions, let's say Gaussian distances. So if we have a distribution that is just blobs of the data, in this case, we can use distances pretty intuitively to determine where we have these clusters here. So we have this blob that has pairwise distances close to each other here, pairwise distances close to each other here, pairwise distances close to each other here. And if we calculate pairwise distances between data points in different clusters, these distances are going to be much higher, much bigger. So we kind of intuitively see what is the clustering here. But what if we have a bit more complicated case? What if we have some kind of distribution and some data points are more dense here? So yes, the pairwise distances are fine here, and then they're slowly becoming larger and larger. Where is the boundary? So in this case, first we can use something like a density. So we can calculate how close data points are to each other in some small patch of the parameter space. And we can say that, okay, the data points are really close here, like really dense here, and here density is more or less uniform in this part and in this part, and much lesser than here. So maybe we have two overlapping distributions, one on top of the other. Another thing we can think about is continuity. Like, okay, we have distances that are really close here and slightly larger here, but really, if we analyze the distances or density in this part of the big blob and in this part of the bridge, they are not going to be that different. Still, if we just look, let's say, if this was a distribution of the sky, of the stars on the sky, and if these two things were galaxies, then we would have that, okay, we would be very clear that, okay, we have two galaxies and we have some kind of stellar stream or a hydrogen stream here. So something different. Our eyes are trained on picking up on this. So we can actually analyze something like a continuity. Okay, we have the distances and the densities that are similar in this weird structure and here, but here it is like the density is the same in all directions, and here it has a preferred direction. So probably something is different in this part of the parameter space from here. And here, this kind of analysis would do something like mathematical morphology. So it is somewhat similar to the convolutional neural network. You would have a kernel that would determine the position and the orientation of the features, and then you would convolve or just analyze whether this kernel describes well the structures here and the structures here. And if there is some difference, then okay, maybe there are some different underlying structures. And once again, okay, so if we have just using these different methods, we can pick up, okay, 3, 2 clusters depending on what we are doing with. Depending on how the underlying structures look like, different algorithms can perform better or worse, obviously. So what kind of, let's think for a moment and let's think about what kind of underlying structures we can have. So an obvious example that we already hear, it would be something maybe like this row, second row from the bottom is just more or less separate Gaussians and like simple blobs for which we can guess pretty easily what the clusters are. Many algorithms are handling this kind of cases well, but not all of them. But then what if we try to apply, once again, this is a two-dimensional thing. So remember that in practice, you will have many dimensions and you do not have any reliable way to determine whether you have this good separation between clusters or whether it is something continuous or whether there are some overlapping structures. So we can try to look for clusters somewhere where they simply do not exist. And the algorithm in general, like if you don't know what you are doing, it's not going to tell you that you are doing something idiotic. So if we use the simple Kamins method, which we are going to test later, and if you apply it on uniform distribution, it will find you the clusters that you asked it to find. And there is a little bit of a hint how to test those things. For this kind of algorithm, you have to specify directly for how many clusters you are looking. So if, for example, you are asking for 3 clusters and then for 4 clusters and 5 clusters, and it finds them with more or less the same reliability, with the same distance, well, then you know that if it finds you any number of clusters, probably this is not a good way to do these things. Then we are talking about nonlinear structures. So, for example, if we have something like twisted like this, if you use distance-based methods, they are going to fail. Why? Because the distance between these 2 points is much lesser. So these points are closer than points between this end of the half moon and this end of the half moon. So, question, is it even right to assume that these half moons are actually 2 separate clusters? It depends. Once again, this is where scientific part comes into view. You have to understand whether these continuous structures have any physical meaning. But if you suspect that you have something like that, so some kind of entwined structures, then you cannot use distance metrics blindly. You have to do something nonlinear, something that either that takes into account that either local distances between data points, and if there is a gap, then it stops searching in this direction, or uses this continuity criterion. Finally, we have things like this, which is also similar to this case. And you can see that, okay, if we are using distance-based methods, so the first column is the distance-based method, then okay, it is failing. Which is kind of expected. But the thing is that if we are using something more complex that actually picks up these nonlinear clusters in a good way, it does not mean that this method is universally applicable. Because pay attention, let's say this row is HDB scan, so right under ML words, because I guess you cannot see this easily. So, okay, it picks easily this entwined, this nonlinear clusters. But once we are going back to this simple simple blobs, it is actually failing because there is a small bridge here and it picks it up and it says, okay, so this is probably the same cluster. So bottom line, there is no universal method. You have to test different methods. You have to understand generally what you are expecting to find, whether you expect some semi-Gaussian multidimensional distributions or whether you expect to find something twisted and find something like evolutionary trap. And you have to test a lot of parameters for each of these algorithms because they are super sensitive to this stuff. Once again, we are going to look at it in practice. So, going from clustering to anomaly detection. A lot of actually these two things are kind of related because in order to find anomaly, which is, as we remember, something out of distribution, we have to identify the distribution first. So we have to find some kind of substructure, clusters. So things that we can do is we can find some kind of overdensities and claim that everything else is an outlier, or we can look for some kind of continuous things and we can find the data points that are not connected to anything else. Once again, depending on the distribution of the data and depending on what you are, what kind of algorithm you are using, it can give you different methods. For example, something, once again, nothing is universal. You can have an algorithm that handles really well identifying overdensities in the scattered background, but then once you are back to the non-linear things, it will for some reason say that, okay, these data points are also outliers on the edges of the half moons. And it is not a stupid conclusion because by default it does not know, it looks for something that is out of distribution. So tails of any kind of Gaussians, tails of any kind of continuous distributions are always suspect. And then there is a question of, once again, the interpretation, whether what you found is something scientifically meaningful or you just have large photometric errors, and this is why this is outside of distribution. And having two screens is annoying. Okay, finally, we are going back to the dimensionality reduction about which we are already talked. When we are talking about dimensionality reduction, you have, like, by default, assume that you have an infinite number of possible ways to reduce things. Because even if we're talking even just about linear projections, if we're talking even about this two-dimensional space, we can project it on this axis, and on any number of linear combinations of this axis. Or we can project it on the z-axis. If we are talking about multidimensional things, and if we are talking about linear, non-linear methods, things getting even more complicated. Because, okay, we can try to project those things keeping the distances locally the same. So basically, if data points are in like neighbors to the next 5 data points, we are trying to put them into the reduced dimensionality space in such a way that they remain neighbors with these 5 data points. Or we might be interested in preserving more global scale. So, okay, if these 5 data points are here, it is okay if they are somewhat at more distance, but we want to know that the blue data points are somewhere relatively close to the orange data points. So, for example, all these unfolding algorithms, they do not give us this information. They preserve the local distances, but we do not know that along one of the axes, blue data points are close to the orange ones. Now, on the other hand, highly nonlinear method like a TSNE will try to put these data points closer and probably fail because it tries to preserve the dimensional relations along many axes. So something, in general case, something has to give. So we will play with TSNE a little bit later, and we will see how changing the parameters of the algorithm helps you to pick up the structures on smaller scales or on larger scales. Now, as I said, doing this kind of signal analysis and doing this interpretation is annoying. So this is one of my favorite scientific examples, which I put in probably every overview lecture that I'm given. This is about using unsupervised machine learning to classify carbon-rich and oxygen-rich stars, which is basically two chemical types of the long period variables. They have a bit different spectra, with different slope, with different spectral features. And what the authors of this paper tried to do, they tried to take a low resolution spectra, so not very fine. And they tried to reduce them to a smallish number so it was like 50 features. And they fed it to this TSNE algorithm, nonlinear dimensionality reduction algorithm, and see whether they can separate oxygen-rich and carbon-rich stars. Now, the crown of this paper is this plot, which actually picks up the different types of spectra fantastically. It has carbon-rich, it has oxygen-rich, and it has some specific subtype of the star as a separate blob. So, beautiful picture. But what is the most interesting to me is this kind of plot. So basically, it is all the same data. First, analyzed with one dimensionality reduction algorithm, then with another dimensionality reduction algorithm, another dimensionality reduction algorithm, different representation of the data. And once again, the same algorithm, but with the data pre-processed in a way. So small detour. When we have the spectrum, how are we going to represent it? How are we going to convert it into the features? So an obvious way is to take, so we have the wavelengths and we have the flux value. So if we have an array of 1,000 wavelengths data points from 300 to something nanometers to 1,000 nanometers, and then at each point we have the flux measurement. So this is essentially this representation. This is how we usually visualize these things, but it is like a 1,000 of data points. This is a lot, 1,000 of features. The way Gaia stores this kind of data, which is data that was used for this paper, is they're representing this wavelength form as a sum of basis functions. So think Fourier transformation. Every kind of complicated curve, you can present it as a sum of many simple sinusoids with different parameters and different coefficients. So this is more or less what Gaia is doing, except they are not using sinusoids, but that doesn't matter. You have some basis functions with different parameters, and each spectra is stored as a set of coefficients by which you have to multiply these basis functions to get this final shape. So the authors of the paper originally used these coefficients, so not just wavelengths measurements, flux measurements, but these coefficients to do this classification. And this is what was done on the first two plots. And you can see that, okay, the details are different because the algorithms are different, but the general picture, you can recognize it, right? We have more or less the same blobs, the same clusters. Now, this picture was done on the original flux values. So we converted this sum of baseline functions to this wavelength form, and we fed it to this algorithm. Now, the thing is that sometimes it is recommended to get rid of some of these functions. So if the full set of functions to describe this waveform is like 50, if you have a noisy spectra, then some of these wavelength functions that are like very small sinusoids, they will be mostly capturing noise because it's just something that came from the instrument. So normally it is recommended to look at the coefficients, look at the flux, and get rid of this extra small base function so that you got a cleaner spectrum. Now, the thing is that when the authors applied this recommended cleaning, they got this kind of picture, which actually had none of these clusters. But these clusters were very clearly correlated with the number of basis functions that were used for recovering this spectrum. So basically, in theory, they applied the pre-processing that was supposed to get rid of the noise. But in the end, they encoded this information about their pre-processing so hardly that the algorithm was picking it up over any kind of physics. Now, I do not know how they really did, in what order they really got these plots, but I have a sneaking suspicion that this was what they did first, like applied the recommended pre-processing, fed it to the machine learning, got a stupid plot, and they were like, okay, yeah, this is not going to work. If I ever meet them, I will ask them. But this actually highlights why doing machine learning is really tricky. Because it is so sensitive to all those little things, to all the some kind of pre-processing detail can be the major signal here. So figuring out how to deal with it is a separate kind of issue. Now, it does not mean that these kind of methods are completely unusable. They are very much usable. And for example, for morphological classifications, you can often meet plots like this. When you have a big picture, when you want to figure out what kind of morphological types of galaxies are present here, this is something for which unsupervised methods work gloriously. You extract some of the features, either using parametric methods, so for example, measuring the color of the galaxy or its extendedness, or using something like autoencoders, about which we will talk probably, maybe, hopefully, during the next lecture. And then you group the galaxies with similar properties. This kind of things works fantastic. I mean, it also works fantastic because if you have pictures, then you can easily diagnose whether everything is going fine or whether your algorithm did something stupid. Finally, you can use these kind of algorithms for as helpers for the supervised machine learning. So during the previous lecture, we were talking about making sure that your parameter space is the same for your training and for your test and for your ground data set. Because machine learning methods are interpolators, not extrapolators. They cannot reliably make predictions in the areas of the parameter space that they didn't see at the training phase. So what we can do? Okay, we can look at the distributions of the parameters and we can say that, okay, if there is a part of the distribution that is well outside, that is very dissimilar to the training distribution, then we cannot make predictions for these things. But this is, for example, a real situation. When we had a training data set that had median and basically had the shape like this, and the data set on which we wanted to apply this machine learning algorithm looked like this. So it was much deeper. This is the magnitude. So we wanted to apply it in the data set that is much deeper, which is not a good idea. You will have stupid predictions for the majority of this data set. So what do? We just give up? I mean, we still have some data points here, and this is a normalized number of objects. So it is actually a lot of objects here because the size of this run data set was much bigger than that of the trained data set. Is there some kind of way how we can pick data points for which we still can use this machine learning algorithms that we trained on the shallower data set? I mean, yes, we can. If we have these unsupervised methods, then how about we look for the areas of the parameter space for which we have some data points from the training space and take only the run data points that are around these training data points. This is what we can do with machine learning. So basically, we are doing dimensionality reduction on the run data set. So we are determining where on this map. So this map, please don't think that this is like special coordinates. It is the reduced space like this one, only a bit different algorithm. So we had some 50 magnitudes and we compressed them into types, projected them into two-dimensional space. And then on this trained map, we put the actual training data points. And we saw that there are black cells for which we have no training data points at all. So obviously, all objects that are in these black cells, for them we cannot make predictions. But for those that have training data points, yeah, we can. So we're just taking the data point, we're just picking up the cells that are probably good, and this is where this is a subset on which we can make reasonable predictions. Okay. Similarly, we can try to estimate whether there are areas of the parameter space for which the data are reliable or not. So issues can happen not only with the features. Sometimes they are also helping with the labels. So for example, someone has done some measurements, but something went wrong. There was a moon on the sky that ruined your photometric measurements, or someone, yes, thank you for the software, or something has gone wrong with the instrument. So we can look at the so what, for example, was done here is that we trained the unsupervised machine learning algorithm, we reduced dimensionality on the features, and then we looked at how similar the labels are in each cell. And for most cells, they were pretty similar. So we had like mean redshift to the galaxies that was okay. Pretty uniform, but there were some cells for which the data points had really wild redshift values, so spread from 0.2 to 1.2. And the colors are similar. So something went wrong here. It is possible that this is like real cells in which we have some kind of deterioration of the signal. So some galaxies are really close, but really red because of the dust, and some galaxies are really far away and appear red because of the redshift. But upon closer inspection, it turned out that just the labels were incorrectly identified. So the similar approach is used for data imputation. Once again, something that we were talking about during the previous lecture. If we have missing data for some of the features, we can group the data points using other features for which we have measurements everywhere. And then we can say, okay, the data points for which we are missing values will get these missing values from the average values in their cell or in their environment. So there are practical applications to this apart from this kind of generic investigation of what the data set is looking like and whether there are some clusters or whether there are some underlying structures. And from this, we are moving to actual examples. And right now, this is 1409. So we are at 1 hour. Let me think for a second. Is it better to make a break here or whether we want to move on? Let's make a short break here. I will get the rest to my voice. And let's reconvene in 10 minutes. Okay? Okay. Sorry? 10 minutes. So it's at 3:20.
Are you doing one break or two break?
Good question.
I'll go for a cigarette.
Huh?
I'll be conservative and go for a cigarette now.
Yes.
How many people drive with me, you know, if it has to be, people who want to run by. I feel like it is my face and I know that it's was cool, or I made a very important like once. No, I use it I mean, I saw some people with like. That's what it is. Yeah. It is a Friday after the lecture, which doesn't. True. So only you determines why. I don't know. I always feel a little bit better because I'm doing it on a very surface level and just having made saying, you know, here it is this and here is a purpose without any serious mass and feeling like I'm not doing a real lecture. Well, so what is it? It's and so let me to the ground very more than even you can hold it. Yeah, but it's kind of a question whether it's better to just do have a explanation of many things, or just explain that if you don't want to do something over it, or I guess one thing for later this is I mean, I made this decision because Flash actually was trying to involve people. No, really. If I could recover some meetings over it. Yeah, that's why we. And different people are coming, which is, yes. We have a class in the end of March, this right before the Easter weekend. So we might not have even less people. Yeah. Because I was also considering very that Friday. But we should just raise this question this content. Yeah, I'll ask them to but I wonder if it's one of those lectures that Christopher's is so basically right now I really have to like choose I was going to fly to Barcelona, and but I also want to listen to Nicolas' presentation. So it's either a flight on Friday, Saturday, presentation, or I'm going to fly at Saturday or Saturday. But this Friday one, which is popular, yeah, that's just a step. So yeah, with the shit, I do something so I have to choose. But I say yeah, I always want to have Fridays. I know it's we feel like I'm sure I'm otherwise, we're like, you should see there. But I think she showed up with the discussion. Well, this is and this is our report for well, when was, I think it was just because I go to still 2 days ahead. I'm 2 days prepared for it. Yeah. The British wanted to see. I went to the school with I was confused. Even though I was supposed to work on the phone at money for things, but I always it was like so to be on real estate. If you could write PCM and I don't know people always say that it's right projection for the Swiss roll. Otherwise it's going to be but isn't it the science of the yes, but you also be based on what you want to find. Yeah. It's 33 now, so like examination, and I don't understand why it's not. Yeah, it's only one thing that you but it also depends like you can make a function that is more familiar because you can going on the process doesn't. So there's all the but that's yeah. So that one is like yes. This kind of series, okay, I'm just worried that my project just like being right, just it's also the account from their house. I don't sometimes they should have really hard. I just wonder whether she's not. Whatever.
Oh, I think that the pairs of the Gaussian distributions, no matter how projected, has dropped away, and we are left with our Gaussian core. And I think that I think everyone has laptops. So actually, we probably all then try to do some practical things and exercises right away, so that I didn't continue annoying you with my blah, blah, blah for the rest of the 2 hours. Please remind me which one of you have no experience with Python? You. Okay. But were you able to open Google Colab last lecture? Yeah.
I don't know.
Okay. Then we can try with some exercises, and then if something goes wrong, then I will help you. Okay. But first, let's start with some demonstrations on pre-existing. Like I'm standing on the shoulders of a bazillion of machine learning educators that were given these lectures before me. So I didn't reinvent the wheel. I just used the demonstrations that existed before me. And we are going to go over several of the most popular algorithms and have a bit of interactive playing, seeing how those things are working. So the first algorithm we are going to cover is, and I have to find where the hell my pointer is across these two screens. Okay, it is here. Hallelujah. The first algorithm that we are going to cover is k-means, which is the clustering algorithm that was used for these examples, for the first column. So basically for identifying these blobs, it works okay. And for everything else, it works horribly. But this is one of the simplest and still commonly used algorithms, and it is still useful to investigate it because it's like wrong slide, because it's like one of the most obvious things of what you can do. So the idea of this algorithm is utilizing Euclidean distances, and it is so-called centroid-based algorithm. You are having some number of data points. Whatever. Some are denser, some are separated, some kind of blob. So you assume that here, which is not really seen very well, that you have some number of clusters. So I would say that if I look at it, the distance between maybe 2, maybe 3. So okay, let's say that 3. What we are doing in this kind of scenario, we assume that data points belonging to the same cluster, that they are going to have pairwise distances closer to each other than objects belonging to different clusters. Now calculating pairwise distances is pretty annoying. So what we are going to do is we are going to define centroids. We assume that for each data point belonging to the same class, we can calculate the center of the mass, like in physics, and we are going to calculate the distances to this center of the mass. So we are dropping these centroids by the number of the clusters, let's say 3, randomly. We are dropping one here, one here, and one here. Now, this is completely random. In practice, you use some tricks to get the centroids closer to the real data points, but it doesn't matter. We calculate, we find the closest data points to the closest centroid. So we are calculating the distances from each data point to each centroid. This is going to be a fully connected graph, and if I draw it fully, that it's going to be a mess. And so this data point has the distance to this cluster x, to this cluster 3x, and to this cluster 5x. So the closest centroid here, and we are assigning it here. We are repeating this for each data point. So this goes like this goes like this, and these data points are assigned like this. Then when we calculate these centroids, we are saying, okay, so these data points belonging to the same cluster, let's calculate the new coordinate of the centroid as just center of the mass. So we are shifting this centroid here. This is false. This is the new true. And you already cannot see anything on my drawing, and this is probably the reason why I prefer to code, because if I try to draw or write something, it becomes a mess real quick. Some people created to work with computers. So we are shifting each of the centroids to the center of the mass. once again, calculating pairwise distances and calculating the new closest centroid. So basically, once again, for this new coordinate, we calculate pairwise distances, find which centroid is the closest to each data point, and reassign the data points. Now, in practice, it means that in only several shifts, the centroids move really well to the center of the blob of the data points. So it takes only very little time. And in practice, it means that all the data points that are more or less close to each other, they are going to belong to the same cluster. But there is a trick, there is an issue here, is that it assumes that all clusters are somewhat round blobs. So if they are really elongated, or if they are twisted like this and intertwisted like this half moons example that we showed, then these centroids, they will move somewhere very quickly, but we will get something like this, where the centroid is here, like the center of the mass of these data points is here, but it obviously neglected all this complex structure and it just blindly cut away the data points from here. Now, we can have a look at how it is happening iteration by iteration. So there is in the repository that you have, there are slides, and on the slides there is a link to this thing, so you will be able to play with it by your own. I highly recommend to do it in your free time because it is pretty intuitive. So let's say that the centroids are going to be picked randomly, and let's see the data distribution. So let's pick Gaussian mixtures. So just Gaussian blobs, we have the data distributions like this. Now we have to pick the number of clusters. Now here we understand that this is 3. So let's add 3 random centroids. And you can see that they are assigned somewhere near the data point, so not just far away, because, yeah, this is smarter than what I did here. And now let's see what is happening. So now we have to calculate what is going to happen is that for each point, we will calculate the distances to each of these centroids, and then we will recalculate which data points have to assign to where. So the first iteration, okay, obvious, these data points are closest here, these data points closest to this centroid, and so on. Now we have to calculate the new center of the mass. And we kind of can guess where they are going to be, somewhere in the center of each blot. So updating, and it moved. And I think that at this point, this is like a single iteration that is going to be to do things that this is going to be it. Now we can calculate the pairwise distances once again and reassign the data points to the new clusters, but nothing is really happening because it is a really simple example. Now let's say that we still have this Gaussian mixture, but let's say that we assume that maybe we have only 2 centroids. Let's see what is happening. First iteration. Yeah, okay. This calculated those distances really weirdly, because for this cluster, this data point is closer to this centroid, and the neighboring data point is already closer to this one. We are updating it. Okay, it moved to the center of the mass of these assigned data points. So the centroids are moved. Reassigning, okay, these data points are moving here because the distance to this centroid is now closer for these data points than to this centroid. Updating, moving again a little bit, we actually see a good separation between 2 things. But okay, this is the best it can do. Now, if we are going to have some more complicated data point, some more complicated data set. Okay, this is really weird example. I actually did not try this before. I have no idea how it's going to perform here. Let's say that we have 3 clusters, which is stupid. Yeah, it is kind of separating the space, equally moving things, but this kind of clustering doesn't make much sense. So there are several weaknesses to the k-means. First weakness, obvious, is that you have to say in advance how many clusters you expect to find. And if you are doing something truly novel, how would you know? Second assumption is that assumes that there is certain Gaussianity to this space, to these data points. If they are distributed in some clumpy way, or if these structures are twisted, then it's not going to work well. In fact, we have, let me once again figure out where my pointer is and how do I move it to the right screen. Okay. We have a little bit of actual exercises to do with nonlinear stuff as well. So let me quickly walk you through this example, and then we will probably take maybe like 5 to 10 minutes to do some exercise on your own. So here we have, I have to pick the right environment. Okay, so we are doing this with some libraries that are pre-installed. For your case, you will have to install things like sklearn, matplotlib, and panel for virtual interactive visualizations. In theory, it all should work on the Google Colab. So we have several functions to define the data sets of different shapes. So Gaussian clusters with different locations and with different shapes, elliptical rings, and half moons. So we are just creating those functions, some visualization functions, and we are looking at how we can generate different data sets. So for this example, we have Gaussian and 2 half moons. And here we have coordinates of the center. And for half moons, we also have the rotation, I mean for Gaussians also. So we can change it instead of 180, 150. And we are going to have this data set moved a little bit. Now we can test how the k-means is going to work. So we generate, for example, some Gaussians, and pay attention, one of the Gaussians is actually quite elongated. And let's see, this is n clusters, 8 is completely stupid. Let's pick a simple case. We can see that there are 3 clusters. In this case, it actually works okay-ish. I mean, we have one data point that is assigned somewhat weirdly, but generally okay. But let's move one of the clusters closer to the another one so that it wasn't clear what is happening here. This is probably G3, I think, and let's say that, no, this is G1, and let's say that we are changing the y coordinate of this thing to, let's say, 1.5. Let's see what we are going to get. Still okay-ish. If we're moving it to 3. Okay, so this was a little bit too close. And what the algorithm has done, it kind of split the biggest cluster in 2 subclusters, assuming that the cluster should be kind of roundish. So you have a bunch of examples with different shapes. So for example, 2 Gaussians that are elongated, it is in this area. So this is the ground truth. This is original distributions of the data points in the clusters. And this is what the algorithm picks up. It just kind of splits it roughly into half. And the half moons that we already saw. So a little bit on the evaluation. Oh, good, I have evaluation metrics. So is there any way to determine whether actually our algorithm did something more or less reasonable or it did something completely stupid? So there are several ways that kind of help you to indicate, but to diagnose it, but not very well. One method is so-called elbow method. So what we are doing here is that when the data point is assigned to centroid, we can measure the distances within these clusters. So all the data points in this cluster, they should have certain pairwise distances. If the cluster is compact and well determined, then we assume that these distances in the cluster will be noticeably, like when we are moving the centroid, when we are picking the number of centroids and when we are measuring these pairwise distances, we assume that for the good number of clusters, this distance is going to be smaller than when we had not enough clusters. But then if we try to split the number of clusters further, so if we have, for example, 3 blobs and we are trying to find 8 blobs, then the distances inside the clusters are going to be once again getting smaller and smaller because the clusters themselves are smaller. But the law at which these distances are diminishing is going to have a different slope. So in practice, if we have not enough clusters and then we are increasing the number of clusters, we are decreasing the intercluster distance rapidly, and then there is no improvement. So this point where we are shifting from good improvement of the distance to the slow improvement is called elbow point, and we can in principle just plot it. And we can look for this point and figure out whether it is like this point at which we are getting good enough distances and there is no point in looking for more clusters. So for example, this is the plot for the example that we had before, and we can guess that, okay, here it is probably two to three clusters, okay, and let's remember that this with well-separated Gaussians is now we have this weird scene that, okay, they're not separated. For the elongated Gaussians, probably two, like we can guess it. Like if we take the derivative, we're figuring out that it's probably somewhere at this point. And for the half-moon Gaussians, I mean, who knows, maybe again two, or maybe it is four. So basically, it's not particularly diagnosable, and this is because this algorithm is actually not very good for this kind of things. Because once again, it relies on distances, and for nonlinear distributions of the data points, distances aren't indicative. What matters here most is whether these data points are connected to any substructures. Another thing that we can do is to use this is interactivity time, this is your exercises. 14:43, we still have 1 hour and 15 minutes approximately, right? Okay. We will probably just skip it. This is going to be boring for you. Let's go to the next method, which is silhouette method. Similar thing, we can calculate the distances between the centroids, but we can calculate it for the clusters to which they were assigned and to the closest other cluster. And then we can figure out some kind of metric. So on this kind of things, this is the distance to the average distance to the nearest neighbor minus distance to the cluster to which it was assigned. And then we are dividing by it. Now, what is happening here in practice? Let's say we have two clusters. We are calculating the average distances between the points to this data point, between these things, and let's say that average distance here is X. And then distances to these data points, and let's say it is, well, actually we have already some notation there. The distance here is A, average one. Here distance is bigger, which is B. So actually there it is B minus. Okay. B is larger than A, so let's do it. 2x minus x. X is here, 2x is distance here. And then we are divided by the maximum number, which is 2x. So we are having x, 2x, 1 second, which means that we have the distance, this silhouette score that is bigger than 0, which actually means that it is good. The closer it is to 1, the better. If we had, for example, here not 2x by 3x, we would have like 2x by 3x, 2/3. So the closer the distances inside the assigned cluster and the farther away this cluster, like the closest wrong cluster, the larger this value is going to be. Now, this kind of metric varies from -1 to 1, but in practice, unless you're doing something completely stupid, it is going to be somewhere between 0 and 1. So in practice, how does it look like? So the integral metric is not particularly useful, but what it is useful is for diagnosing separate data points itself. So the plots here, okay, we are going to skip it. These kind of plots are much more useful. So have a look at these kind of things. Here we are plotting this calculated value for each data point in these clusters. And we have a look at different clusters. So for, let's say, well-separated cluster, each data point has silhouette score that is bigger than 0.5 and almost all are bigger than 0.6, meaning that all of those data points are well separated from the closest neighboring cluster. Okay, this is fine. Now we have clusters like this that have some data points that are, okay, really close, have somewhere in the center, but some of the other data points, they have low silhouette cluster, meaning that they are somewhere where, I mean, it can belong to this particular cluster, or it actually can be real close to another cluster to which it didn't get assigned. So the separation here isn't good. Now, depending on the topology of the data, the results are looking different. So for example, for half Gaussians, we have this weird thing. So yeah, okay, we have a lot of data points that are kind of well separated. And then we have these small things for which kind of, it seems like these data points would be better if they were assigned to a different cluster. So this kind of visual thing helps you to a little bit guess how well those distances are describing how well this cluster assignment is satisfies this distance requirement. Now we have HDB scan examples that we are which I didn't actually put in the slides. Let's go really briefly over it because it is also a common example and we do not go into too much detail with it. So, okay, what if we have these kind of complicated clusters that have sub-samples? Actually, this kind of thing I do not like. Let me reinitialize this data set. What if we have some kind of clumpy data set? And we do not actually know what is the optimal number of clusters for it. It would be kind of good if we could, first of all, not to set up the number of clusters in advance. And second, if we could kind of play around with the parameters and look for, okay, are we looking for big blobs and neglecting the noise, or are we looking for tiny subtypes of something that kind of, maybe there are a lot, maybe some of them are noise, but maybe some of them are physically meaningful. Now, one thing that we can do for this kind of analysis is doing clustering hierarchy. So and I already wiped it out, okay, never mind. So let's say for this data set, we have some kind of distribution that is, okay, looks like it might be a single distribution or maybe like two strongly overlapping Gaussians. And there are some data points now. Here there are only a couple, but here is kind of some kind of is it a blob? I mean, here it's not very well seen, but imagine that it is on a little bit bigger distance. So maybe we have one big cluster on two big clusters and then some finer details. What we can do is we can first pick those coarse clusters and then look inside them for finer structures. So let me reduce this initialization. Still not, okay, to 3. Actually, let's see how HDB scan is going to fare against it. So yes, what HDB scan is doing, it is finding the bigger clusters, looks for finer details, and as the output, you will have something like a dendrogram. So first, it shows you the higher level clusters, then finer level clusters. And this thing says that, okay, it still does not pick up those things. Pretty sure that if we play a little bit with the parameters, we could find a better parameter. So number cluster size is like this. Let's play with the minimum cluster size is not going to say minimum samples. Maybe it will help us. Let's say default is 20. What is going to happen here? No. This is still not picking it up. Epsilon. Justin. So epsilon is one of the parameters for figuring it out, setting up the sensitivity of this thing. So default is 0. No. So I have to play with the parameters, but basically this thing should be able to pick up those two clusters pretty reliably. So for example, for the elongated Gaussians, what we see is that, okay, it picks up this overdense cores and marks the rest data points as outliers. So basically, it is not sure whether they are belonging to this cluster, so it marks them as background noise. Yes, here we should be able to play with it. Actually, I want to use data 1 and see whether I can pick up the parameters to detect it. So when we are talking about minimum number of samples, it is uses this to determine how many neighbors do you need to figure out whether in the epsilon radius to figure out whether those data points belong to the clusters or not. So you can see that these standalone data points are marked as okay, we do not belong to anything. And okay, I cannot figure it out here because, okay, minimum cluster size is how few data points do you need to call it a separate cluster. So basically this kind of thing, I would have to play with the parameters a little bit more, but it should be able to pick up those two subclusters. And then there are once again some exercises for the diagnosing and exercise for breaking the algorithm. So 1454. Let's keep 4 people have laptops open. Are you working on something of your own or looking at the examples? 2 of you look at the examples. The rest are working on your own. Sure? 5 minutes to look at it on your own. Okay. There is an exercise called break the algorithm. So basically, your task for the next 5 minutes in the very end is to try to come up with a picture for which you clearly see different clusters, but the algorithm cannot pick them up. It's an easy exercise. And it is kind of naive considering that I already came up with those overlapping Gaussians that are not separable. I have to try to fix it. I am so tempted to check whether I messed up with the code somewhere because some really stupid examples for which I obviously can guess at least 3 or maybe 4 clusters, we systematically produce only 2 clusters. So if you find something that I've done wrong in the code, let me know. It kind of worked much more impressively when I used it last time a year ago. Did you have any success with coming up with anything interesting? Nope. But does it run at least? Okay. Okay, good. Let's consider it a success that we were able to execute the code today. And let's move on to the next topic, which is, let me switch to my slide. I think it is TSNE example. So this is it. Nope. Yes. So, okay. Before we move on, so question. How do you think, can we apply clustering algorithms in multidimensional space? Like, okay, on 2-dimensional, fine, let's say we have 15 dimensions. Can we do the same k-means things there?
I guess it can, but should.
I guess you can, but should you? Okay.
And for 50, okay, multi-dimensional, it's like 3 or 12, it's manageable, but for 50,
Okay, so the thing is that for something like k-means, increasing the size of the increasing the dimensionality is actually a big trouble. Because of, if you remember from the previous lecture, something about dimensionality, the course of dimensionality, the distances are going larger, the data points are spreading more far away. So finding the neighbors in this, when you have this parameter space blown up, gets harder and harder. Unless your data points are allocated in really dense blobs, then the more features you are putting in, the more they are spread, and the harder it becomes to find reliably any overdensities. So what is usually done is first you are doing dimensionality reduction. So dropping it to 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions. And then on top of this, you run some kind of clustering algorithms. Which brings us to dimensionality reduction algorithms. So PCA we covered in one of the first lectures, actually Saptashva covered it. And we already talked about it a little bit more, like, okay, we can project directly on some axis, but a smarter thing is to find an axis on which we have a biggest variance of the data points, the biggest spread, and use this axis. But what if we have some kind of twisted dimensionality that does not really reproject easily? So, for example, any kind of half moons like these ones. Okay, no matter how you can pick up the axis of the maximum variance, which is probably going to be this one, or actually maybe this one. But if you just project the data points on this axis, here it is point, actually, I have no idea what it's going to be look like. Maybe it's going to be a Gaussian, or maybe it's going to be something like weird with 2 blobs. If you project on this diagonal, like the main diagonal axis, it certainly is going to be something like sharp up, then plateaus and down. So any kind of structure can be hidden in this projection. What you would want to do here is somehow untwist these structures and make them separable. So this is where nonlinear methods are coming into play. How works something like TSNE? It analyzes, it does not try to project the space as a whole. What it tries to do is it picks a point, it analyzes the neighboring data points. So once again, calculates the pairwise distances according to some metric. then it memorizes these closest neighbors, and then it tries to put them onto a smaller, lesser dimensionality space in such a way that the neighbors in the original space ended up being neighbors in the new space. So there is an illustration somewhere. I mean, we could go to this demo, but probably not because we won't have enough time. But we have it somewhere here in the notebook about dimensionality reduction, particularly how TSNE is working. So, yes, and you will have to look at your screen because you cannot see it here. But I have it as a separate figure. Yes, I do. Can I increase it? Yeah, okay. Good. So we have some data points located in some blobs. We calculate the distances. The data points in this blob are going to end up the closest, and the data points that farther away are calculated the fastest. Now, how TSNE works, it is actually a little bit more complicated than just calculating the distances. This is why this ECNE comes from, because it's t-stochastic something Thompson, but basically it tries to calculate the Gaussian, the probabilities of the data points to be close enough, assuming that the distribution in the original data space is Gaussian. And then it puts these data points also on a distribution, on the probability distribution in the lesser dimensionality space, but using students' t-stochastic distribution instead of Gaussian. Why? Because when you have Gaussian, it has very short tails. And then when you are trying to squeeze a higher dimensionality, so many data points are close along different axes, when you are trying to squeeze it into one or into two axes, you are forcing a lot of data points into the same range of the values on the lesser dimensionality. This may result in the fact that all the data points are kind of just clogged together. Now, students' distributions has longer tails. So when you are fitting the range of the Gaussian into students, it kind of squeezes, it kind of expands it a little bit more far away. So the data points are located more far away from each other. So it does not solve all the problems, because once again, if you have some kind of complicated structure that many data points are all many structures are all entangled together, I mean, there is a limit on how you can untangle this thing. But we can try to have a look how it is done, what is happening into this multidimensional space, and I did not run it completely. Let me start from the beginning. So the structure of this is the second notebook, dimensionality reduction. And the first part is PCA, which we covered in the first lectures. Okay, so we can generate different data sets. Okay, this one is actually static. This one should be dynamic. Okay, so here we have some three-dimensional blobs, but actually there are also functions for three-dimensional spirals and I think concentric spheres. What are you doing? Come on. Yes. So this is PCA projection, which we skipping, and we are coming to the TSNE. So here we can create some data sets. So we have three-dimensional spiral and three-dimensional concentric spheres. So for example, a spiral looks like this, and you can change the parameter of it, like squeezing it or rotating it. And then we are running the TSNE to see what it becomes. Okay, so it becomes some kind of weird thing and also separated here. Why? Depends. So once again, TSNE is mostly analyzing the close neighborhood of the data points. So if there is somewhere a gap in the data, for example, due to the noise, it may separate this kind of structure into several. And actually, if you zoom in, then you can see that, okay, there is actual noise, which is regulated here by some parameters. You will have to look at the code. So another thing that is dependent is the parameters of this algorithm, because you can set up basically how many data points the algorithm is looking at when it tries to determine this closest neighborhood. So if we come back to the explanation here, we have the parameters to say what is the width of this Gaussian for which we are looking the closest data points. Somewhere here, yes, there is an example with the concentric spheres, and actually be very careful with the noises here because it is going to be pretty illustrative. I had to play a lot with the parameters yesterday in order to have this clear separation of two substructures. Because what I kept hitting, what kind of wall I kept hitting, these concentric spheres, I kept putting them too close together, so the radii was pretty close, and I kept adding the noise that was too big, and the algorithm was picking up the substructures in the shells, and it was putting them as separate structures, and then it was mixing the concentric spheres together. So if you run PCA, actually this is probably better to run something like this. You cannot separate the substructures at all. Do I have the concentric spheres somewhere? No. Basically, no matter how you are projecting things, if they are concentric, if they are twisted, they are going to result as one Gaussian blob and another Gaussian blob in the center. No matter how you look at these three-dimensional pictures, it's going to be inseparable. Now, TSNE or other nonlinear dimensionality reduction algorithm can separate them, but it can also pick up these substructures due to the noise and it can drag them out. So the exercise that was here, I think it was several spirals. No, right now this is spheres. So basically, okay, we can try changing the parameters a little. So you have perplexity, which is this rough proxy. It's not literally number of neighboring points at which the algorithm looks, but rough proxy for the number of neighbors and number of iterations of the algorithm. So once again, similarly to any machine learning algorithm, it does this picking up the data points and calculating the differences between distributions. It does it iteratively and propagates the error using gradient descent. So number of iterations is this thing. So you can try to play with this perplexity parameter and see how it changes. Now, here it does not change a lot because once again, I picked up really easy spheres. But let's see where we have these spheres defined here. And the noise is 0. Okay, let's add the noise 0. I'm actually not sure what would be a good parameters for this. Let's say the noise is 0.01 and the outer diameter is this 2. I already had horrible results. So let's say that it is 2. And let's see what we are getting. Okay, so visually it's still okay. But if we are zooming in, you can notice that some of the data points are really outside. So here we zoomed well into the sphere, but still there are some green data points that are in front of the blue ones. So basically we are still not fully inside this green sphere, this outer sphere. And then if we go to the TSNE, we reinitialize it. Yes, and here we are hitting the problem with separating the substructures clearly. So it kind of guesses that, and the colors are mismatching. I should have picked it as green ones, sorry. it kind of figures out that there is some inner structure and some outer structure, but then there are some data points that keep ending up in the center. So without knowing what it is originally, it would be hard to figure out whether there is maybe 3 concentrics here. So when you're changing those parameters, you can see that sometimes those data points are jumping outside. So this is something to look at. And this is why actually with TSNE, it is normal to play with these parameters, or maybe to try to denoise the data set previously and see how it changes things. Because once again, it is very sensitive to the local noise, and it picks up local structures easily. There is another algorithm that works in the same vein, but which is more attentive to the global structure, which is UMAP. I mentioned it on the slides. I do not have the demo example here, but in also many occasions, you will see both TSNE and UMAP to kind of figure out, okay, if there is it a noise that picks up some substructure, that generates some substructure, or there is something real in the global structure. Okay, so we are not going to NIST right now because we still have some things to do, some topics to cover, but either after this lecture or after the next lecture when you will cover autoencoders, there are some tutorials that allow you to do this kind of things on the real-looking data sets, either on the MNIST numerical, handwritten numerical images, or on Galaxy Zoom. So if you play with it a little bit, and the outputs for some reasons are not here. Here is the right notebook. Yes, then you will be able to see how the digits, the images of different digits are actually grouping together. And then you will be able to see how they are separated in this multidimensional space. There is also an example with Galaxy Zoom. So yeah, feel free to play with it. And if you're planning to do the final project, then you can use it to, for example, investigate whether there is some kind of clustering in your data set. But we are moving further away. Moving on, not further away. We are not moving further away. Dimensionality, we covered it. Let's briefly talk about decision trees and random forests, and about isolation forest, so anomaly detection method. This is 1522. Okay, we're still on time pretty well. So, decision trees. I would say that together with different neural networks, decision trees are the most popular algorithm there ever has. Why? First of all, it is simple, computationally cheap. And second, it is at least somewhat interpretable, which is not something that a lot of machine learning algorithms can boast. So how are we going, what this decision tree makes? Let's say we have some data set with a number of features, and we're trying to solve a classification problem. So we have 2 classes. We have n features. We want to see which combination of features produces the best prediction for a given class. If we are doing this manually, we can do this in a such naive way, like, let's say I want to decide whether I go on vacation to Canary Islands, or whether I want to go on vacation on a conference on AGNs. So we have a number of features for this kind of prediction. Am I going on Canary Islands, or am I going on a conference? So the number of features is, for example, what is going to be the cost, whether I want to go somewhere where the temperature is higher than 30 degrees, something like that.
Is that applicable?
Hmm?
Is that applicable? Is that applicable?
Is there any difference
Yeah.
Okay, yes, exactly. You get it, yes. So how would I make this decision? Okay, so is there okay, so class 1 is Hungary Island, class 2 is Angel Island. The core, the root node is going to be a question, is there free? If the answer is yes, let me pause for a second because I didn't think this example through. I'm afraid that I am going to divulge. Okay, let's talk about decision trees in general, how we're doing this in our life. Is there free food? Yes, the answer is if it is it important to me. Let's rephrase it. Do I care about food? Maybe I am really picky and I want to I don't want people to give me food. I want to choose. Do I care about food? If the answer is yes, then do I, okay. So let's say if I care and the Canary Islands does not have the free food, then right away I can predict that I am not going to Canary Island. No, if I care about the food and it's not, so I'm not going to Canary Island. And then, considering that this is only binary decision, I am going to AGM conference. So we have a fantastic decision tree. This is a horrible example. I apologize. I should have thought it better. So we have a fantastic decision tree that has several nodes, like really only one node where we are making this decision, and we have two leaves, yes and no. So everything, all decisions, if we are going to yes, are going to be AGM conference, and if no, I can still go either to Canary Islands or AGM conference. So I can ask a second question, which is, do I want to pay for the tickets? If yes, I mean, who wants but okay? If no, then I do not go to Canary. If I am okay with paying for my tickets, then I still can go either to Asian conference or Canary Island, and then there is going to be some other decision, not which I'm not going to invent right now because I will look really stupid. But bottom line, okay, we have one direction, one branch in which we have only one decision node and right away the decision. And then we have another branch for which we have second level nodes, maybe third level nodes, maybe final nodes, and then the final nodes for which we are not making the decision further. This is going to be the leaves. So when we are talking about machine learning, we're doing the separate kind of decision process. Only once again, since we are talking about data and all the data are in distances in our case, we are picking some kind of boundary between some range of values. So actually, I am better to open the demonstration that was prepared by people who are preparing better than me, because it is going to be much more visual and I don't have to look really weird further on. So this is what we were talking about. Root node, this is the place where we are asking the first question. Then we are splitting, going to different branches, and some branches are going to right away have the final decision, and some branches are going to have more nodes. So when we are talking, can I move it here? Yes. When we are talking about a real data set, let's say we have some, in this example, some trees for which we have some parameters, some features, which is diameter of the trunk and their height. And we have apples, cherries, oats, doesn't matter. what we can do is, okay, we right away see that there is some dependencies of the type, so of the label from these features. And right away, like intuitively, we could draw some lines. We could say that, okay, all the trees for which the diameter of the trunk is more than 0.5 meters are definitely oaks, and all the trees for which the height is smaller than 2.5, 3 meters are definitely cherries. I think it's cherries here. So we would right away have an opportunity to do this simple classification, and we would be left with a cloud of data points for which we still have this mixed thing. So let's try to do this decision. And why it doesn't work? Yes, but it should work. Come on. Oh, here it is. And so if I hide this, okay. Okay. So once again, come on. It's going to be so much more visual, said she. Oh. Nah, it's just freezing. Okay, basically, what we are doing, we're splitting the data space across along the certain features. So first, we are asking, is the diameter bigger than certain value or smaller? If it's bigger, then on the left, like on the one branch, we are going to have only the oaks, and this is the end decision. So right away, we have here the leaf, and for all the objects that end up in this leaf, we are assigning it the label oak. Then we are going to this, if the height is lesser than this certain value, we still have a mix of objects, but we see that there is a decision that we can make.
Break?
We had a break, but yeah. Okay. That's not ominous at all. So then we are can do a split along the different feature, and we can say, okay, so here we have mostly cherries, and at this point we can say that, okay, the purity of the sample is good enough, so maybe this is already the leaf, but we still see some contaminants in this sample, so maybe we will want to do the splits further. But let's move on. We still have this sample that has a lot of contamination. We are doing another split once again along the diameter of the trunk, and we are saying that, so it was mostly to decide that the apples here, yeah, okay, if we are splitting it here, pure sample, this is going to be a leaf. And we are repeating this process iteratively one after another until we either reach a certain depth of this algorithm, of this implementation of this decision tree, or until we reach a certain purity of the samples that end up in each leaf, or until we have some minimum number of the objects. So in principle, if you have a really noisy data set, you can keep going until every leaf has only one object, and then you will have a perfect classification. But in practice, you do not want to do this, because imagine that, okay, so in order to isolate this data point, you will have to keep splitting and splitting and splitting and splitting. Now imagine that you have some new measurements where this data point ended up not here, but like 0.005 to the left or to the top, and it already ended up in a different split for which you have the classification that it's not apple but cherry. So this kind of approach, if you try to go as fine as possible, is producing overfitting really easily. It learns the exact location of your data points in this data set, but then it does not generalize very well. So we keep going, probably keep going. Okay, yes, question where to partition. So as I said, we are making this decision. So how is it done in practice? Like, okay, here we just look at the plot and decide how the algorithm is doing. In practice, it tries all possible combinations. So in the root node, if we go back up, we can say that, okay, we can draw this. No, come on. We can draw this, I said, yes. We can draw this line here, but we see it. What algorithm is doing? It says, okay, we have two features. Let's try to draw a vertical line here, 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 like in all possible directions. And let's try to draw horizontal lines in all possible locations as well. And let's calculate whether which of these draws produces the cleanest sample in at least one of the branches. Now, how to determine cleanest sample depends on the problem. You can just take the fraction of misclassifiers per this split, or if it is regression problem, you are calculating mean square difference or mean absolute difference for this sample. But we tried all possible combinations. So for the first split, we found that there is this line here. Okay. Second split, we are trying again all possible vertical lines, all possible splits along the one feature here, and all possible splits here, calculating which split produces cleanest difference, making the split. And we keep going like this. So so basically here we can see how different purity metrics can change depending on where we put this partition. I suggest you play with it on your own. We are not going into this. What it means in practice that we are getting a decision tree that is fairly easy to interpret, because at each node we made a decision like this feature says that if we take the values bigger than 5, this is ox, lesser than 3. So for each node, for each classification, we can see the reasoning chain, like far predecessor of the modern reasoning chains, that says why this decision was made for this object, which is kind of very hopeful thing when you are doing this machine learning. But as we mentioned already, if you pick, you can train this algorithm to be as precise as you want, but in reality, then it will just memorize your data set. And if you shift the measurements by, let's say, 10 centimeters, the classifications becomes garbage. This is why decision tree as a single thing isn't very robust, isn't very reliable. But turns out we can we can use a trick to combine a lot of these very sensitive, easily overfitting predictors into something much more robust. And this is so-called ensemble methods. So ensemble methods in general mean that you combine a ton of different predictors. That's it. Why does it work? Because there is a theorem somewhere from 17 something that says that if something is making predictions that are at least better than 50%, then when you combine many of these predictions, the final prediction, the cumulative prediction, is actually slowly rising. So this is somewhat a justification why we have voting systems in everyday life, but it is also a reason why machine learning uses ensembles of algorithms pretty often, whether with something like decision trees or also with neural networks and so on and so forth. Basically, not sometimes, but actually quite often, you combine the predictors that have very different nature. So you take some decision trees, you take some neural networks, you take maybe even some linear predictions like just some linear regression. You put in together these predictions, and if they are more right than wrong, even if it's very little, in some you are likely to have a better prediction. So random forest is take a lot of decision trees, plant them together, and see what kind of picture emerges. Now, there is a nuance to this. If you look at how these decision trees are constructed from the previous example, like if you don't use any tricks and twists, it's always going to produce the same result because it tries all possible combinations of the features and splits in the root node. It picks the best. I mean, if you have the same data, then the next time when it's going to look, it will pick the same best solution, and then the same best solution on the second level, and then on the third. So it's going to be the same tree. How do you fix it? I mean, one option is you can shift your data a little bit around. Okay, you can do that, but this is risky because how much noise do you have to add? And maybe you are ruining your actual signal. So what people mostly do is so-called bagging. Bagging is put everything that you have in a big bag, not bag, draw a random number of things from this bag, and use this random sample to construct a new decision tree. I don't remember whether this is explained here, probably not, but we can try to check it. Yes, this is basically the explanation of this theorem, Cordor-Jury theorem. Okay, I do not know the history behind it. But yes, if we have some number of predictors and if their accuracy in general moderately high, bigger than 50%, depending on how the higher this accuracy, individual accuracy, the better. But generally, if you average the predictions, the overall accuracy is going to be growing. So this doesn't matter. Bugging, it is here. So basically, the idea is, first of all, let's train different trees on different subsamples of data. So we have let's say 1,000 rows with 10 features each. Let's give to each tree only 300 objects, 300 rows from our data set. If we are drawing them randomly, then the best decision for each subsample is going to be a little bit different. And it means that from that point, the build tree is going to be different. The second thing we can do is we can randomly select a subset of the features that we are using. If we have 10 features for this 1,000 of objects, okay, let's give each decision tree only 3 features. It is going to simplify the picture significantly. The trees are going to be really different, but the trees are also going to be forced to use the information in these features as best as possible. So we are kind of naturally maximizing the variance of these decisions. A good thing about this approach is also that it naturally gives you information about which features are completely meaningless. And actually, this kind of approach is pretty good and pretty insensitive for dimensionality course. Because if some tree got features that are completely unuseful, it makes horrible predictions, then we look at the final statistic of this horrible prediction. It's wrong in more than 50%, not right in more than 50% cases. We just drop this tree, and probably if those features are showing up in a lot of ineffective trees, we are dropping those features at all. So this is one of the algorithms that naturally produces the list of feature importances, like in which cases those features, and for how many trees these features were important from the very beginning. The important thing to remember here is feature importance does not have any direct correlation with physical reality. So it is literally in how many cases it was good to look at these features to make a decision. That's it. So, Bagging method. We have some samples in this case in science, doesn't matter. Imagine that this is stars that have this very different structure. We are taking some random samples of these data sets. Then we have four features, and we can take only 3 of these features for each tree. And then we are making decision on one feature, and then we are growing the tree. So the final trees are all different. For each of these three, we have decision paths, and for each of these three, we have a list of features that were important in making this decision. And then we are averaging these decisions, and then we are getting the predictions for each data point, which is the simple maximum number of predictions made by these trees. Okay, this is basically what we already explained, but this is kind of the simplest implementation. In practice, there is a ton of different algorithms that are using random forest. Why? Because you actually can do the splitting in different ways, and because sometimes, quite often, like some of the best algorithms use this thing called boosting. What does it mean, boosting? It means that when we have a prediction from some tree, and we still have some leaf so how the leaves works. Each decision path produces the prediction of the same class. So if we went through this row, this node, in the leaf, all objects that ended up here, they are going to be assigned the same class. But what if the real labels are still different? So we got a leaf for which all objects are predicted label oak, but in reality, in 20% cases, cherries end up here. We can train a different tree, or generally speaking, a different algorithm to predict how wrong this decision tree is going to be given the features of each object. So we are not predicting the label, we are predicting the error of the previous tree. And then we are using this predicted error to correct the predictions from the previous tree. You can implement this in different ways. This is why there is a bunch of algorithms. They are all decision tree based, and basically they are very popular. It would be, of course, a good idea to show you the comparison of these methods, but to be fair, I do not really know the difference of all these details because I never look into these implementation details. So this is the homework for those who really want to figure out what is the difference between different boosting implementations. And for now, we are going to move to the way to look into the way how to use this kind of algorithms for doing not just classification or regression, but also for the anomaly detection. So if you think about this process, actually, let's go back to one of these visualizations. I think that maybe there is a good example here. Yeah. So you can imagine that some of these data points are going to be easier to separate, like all these data points, okay, we identified them correctly with after only one split. And then some of the data points are going to be much harder to isolate. So for example, we did split here, okay, there is some mix. We did split here, still okay. We kept going, and then some of the data points will require much more splits than the others. So one of the ideas of how you can isolate outliers is to use this kind of lengthy trees to look for the leaves that took too many nodes to reach them. Like too many decisions are needed to get the correct prediction for this class, and to use this length of the trees as a predictor whether this data point is weird or not. This is how you can do it in a supervised way. But you can also try to do it in an unsupervised way, which is simply let's try to look for the outline points. So we are not trying to analyze any kind of clusters. We are just checking how many splits are needed to isolate these data points from the rest of the decision, from the rest of the data set. And we have a demonstration somewhere here. Once again find the pointer. Yes. And now I have to find it again. How many PhDs are needed to find the point? Fine. So yes, isolation forest. We are once again activating the environment, important stuff, and creating the datasets. And looking at how we can isolate these data points. So for the classification, for the finding anomalous data points that are in the midst of the distribution, you can use the supervised method and analyzing the length of the decision that is needed to arrive to this data point. Now, for the isolation in unsupervised method, you can actually use just the opposite decision. You can see how easy it is to isolate this data point from the majority of the sample. So if it is an outlier, I mean, it is kind of obvious that if we have some kind of blob of the data, then the bordering data points are easier to split off than something that is in the middle. So in practice, we can generate some Gaussians, and once again, I changed some parameters and probably ruined the visualization power of this thing. So originally it was probably 3 blobs and some random data points, and we can figure out that, okay, we have some data points that are really far away. We can just cut them off easily. So probably these data points, I would say that we need maybe probably 1 or 2 decisions like this and like this. And for something like this data point, you cannot really isolate it from everything else. Once again, this is done, since this is a forest, this is done in ensemble. So we are trying many splits on these features, on taking different subsamples of the data, and we are averaging how many decisions are needed in order to isolate this data point. So once again, depending on the decisions, depending on the data, on the shape of the data sets, so this algorithm can fail or can perform well. So here, when we have some kind of half moons, it picks up, okay, that these things are hard to isolate from one another. But actually, depending on the settings, it also says that this data point belongs to this half moon. Why? Because, okay, in order to isolate it from this scene, you are making a split here, you are making a split here, then you have to isolate this data point from this part of the data set, from this part of the data set, and from this. And we are just drawing straight lines. So you have to draw a lot of straight lines in order to separate this data point from the rest of the cluster. Because once again, this is nonlinear. And nonlinear things do not play well with the direct lines. And surprisingly, this is the end of the demonstration. And I didn't even add any examples to play on your own here. Okay, so at this point, I think we should go back to the presentation and kind of summarize what happened in these 30 slides with some links, with some references, what happened here and what we were trying to learn here. So, manifold and dimensionality. We assume, once again, that many dimensions are not always necessary to describe this data. We assume that we can use a lesser number of dimensions to do this. We can try to do it in different ways. Sometimes we are interested into particular shape of this underlying manifold, or sometimes we do not care about it all. We care just about whether the data points are located together and whether certain parts of the data space mean that these data points belong to the same cluster, to the same class. If we are doing it in kind of unsupervised way, we can do it in a class 10 mode, just grouping objects together. in dimensionality reduction mode, so finding the underlying structure, or in outlier novelty detection, so finding the data points that are somehow outside of the distribution. If we are working with many dimensionality, then clustering and anomaly detection often is better done after dimensionality reduction. Supervised methods also. So do dimensionality reduction even if you are not interested about all the intricacies of your data set. Practical implementations, okay, one thing is simplifying our life for other methods. Another is checking whether what we are doing with the data is reasonable, whether the data distributions are the same for the train and test data set, or doing the data imputation. So just figuring out whether we can use the neighboring data points to kind of average and guess the information, the missing information about the data points that weren't lucky to get all the observations in all the features. And the algorithms that are used for this kind of things can be linear or can be nonlinear. There is no universal good algorithm because once again, everything depends on the shape of your data set. If you have a straight line, several straight lines, several highly elongated blobs, then don't go for something non-linear that is sensitive to the details because it will pick up the noise. But go for some simple algorithm that just analyzes the continuity and the distribution. Or if you have something more real life, then probably you will have to go for nonlinear things and play with the parameters a lot to kind of observe which structures in your reduced picture, which are stable or which are moving around, which are kind of shifting. So yeah, it's not hard science. It's a little bit of art, a little bit of dark magic, which is a horrible thing to say on a lecture in a university. I'm sorry. But surprisingly, in many practical applications, we use it even if not as a main method, then as a helper. And yes, decision trees and random forest, which are basically an advanced or machine understandable implementation of the process that you are doing in your head when you're trying to make a decision about your vacation. Very popular, basis on trying to come to the best classification using different features and by combining a lot of somewhat okayish predictors to have a better prediction. And at this point, I think that this is all that I had to say, yes. And I did another horrible thing during today's lecture. I never paused to ask whether you have questions. I mean, what if I kept droning and everyone just quietly fell asleep and were like, come on, just speak faster. I'm not going to task anything. Okay. This is it from my side. I have no idea how all this evaluation thing is going to be done for the people who are going for credits. Ask Saptash or Gabi. But if you try to do any of this on your data sets and encounter anything weird, feel free to drop by on the third floor last door and ask me or just ping me via email. And thank you, the brave souls, epic 5 people plus 1 instructor who stick around and not cursing me along the way. And thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.